Welcome to Future Ready Live, where we talk about topics that will help CPAs, CGMAs, finance and accounting pros prepare for change and transformation. I'm your host, Tom Hood, the EVP for Business Engagement and Growth at the AICPA SEMA, the largest association of professional accountants, CPAs and CGMAs in the world. Today, we're going to be talking about what CFOs need to know about the economy. And you're in for a treat because joining me is Dr. Anirban Basu. He's the chairman and CEO of Sage Policy Group. I think I've known you, Anirban, for probably about 7 or 8 years and all the work we did at the Maryland Association of CPAs. Anirban is a study in contradictions. He has been called an economist with a personality, or alternatively, one with a sense of humor. He's twice been recognized as one of Maryland's 50 most influential people. He has also been named one of the Baltimore region's 20 most powerful business leaders. Maryland Governor Larry Hogan appointed Dr. Basu as chairman of the Maryland Economic Development Commission from 2014 to 2021. He teaches global strategy at Johns Hopkins University and serves as the chief economist function for a number of organizations around the country. He's read every one of Agatha Christie's novels. He's an avid fan of James Bond, English football, Indian cricket, all Baltimore teams, and lives with his wife and 2 daughters, Kimaya and Kohina. Anirban, say hello to our audience.
Hello, audience. Good to see you.
So let's start with the most recent jobs report and all of this stuff about recession, jobs, et cetera. What does this mean to CFOs trying to plan for the future of the companies? Can you make sense of it for us?
I can try. Lots of contradictory information out there. I mean, if you want to hear that the economy is in bad shape and in recession, you watch Fox News, of course. If you want to hear that it's in good shape and not in recession, you watch CNN. But we have data, and they are also contradictory, as it turns out. So in July, for instance, America adds 528,000 jobs. That's a more than respectable tally and well ahead of the consensus expectation. Unemployment is down to 3.5%, which is exactly where it was in February of 2020 before COVID-19 undid the economy. And so if you look at the labor market, if you look at retail sales, if you look at summer travel, if you look at a variety of indicators, especially those related to consumer spending, the economy looks like it's in quite good shape. On the other hand, inflation, of course, 8.5% consumer price inflation over the past 12 months, for which we have data. And of course, we had that technical recession during the first 6 months of the year, negative real GDP growth during the first quarter of 1.6%, negative real GDP growth of 0.9% during the second. And while that's not the official definition of recession, for many people, it is recession. And so again, this debate about whether or not we're in recession continues. But a final point on this, typically recessions are characterized by the following set of circumstances: too much supply, lack of demand. This time around, we've had the exact opposite: too much demand, too little supply. And this just has not felt like a recession to me, especially from a jobs perspective. And so that's where we are right now. It's a mixed economy, but I don't think it's one in recession.
So when you think about the CFO job that's trying to help a company project what the future might look like, any advice you'd give them? Because you're right, it's all these now conflicting reports, and you can look at any one example and say, well, there's a recession. No, there's a great economy. How can they help make sense of it? Because I guess we used to always be told consumer driven was the major driver of how our economy looked. Is that right? Or give us some of your insights about how we think about what's coming next.
Yeah, if I'm a chief financial officer, what's my goal here? Not to become too complacent. And it's easy to become complacent, isn't it? Because we've had in the last several weeks some rallying on financial markets. We've had interest rates come down a bit, and it feels as if the economy is settling down, and inflation is coming back to earth a little bit. We seem maybe to have achieved peak inflation, and so you say, okay, well, the economy is going to be fine. Things seem to be settling down. I don't think one should take that approach. That in fact there's going to be a lot of volatility in financial markets, that the Federal Reserve is still tightening interest rates, that risk of recession is still very elevated, and therefore what can a CFO do? Really focus attention on cash and cash flow. Now, of course, they always do that, but when we've had previous economic downturns, the firms that fared the best were the ones that moved most aggressively to curtail costs, right? They preserved cash as aggressively as possible. And while I think the balance of 2022 actually looks pretty decent to me economically, I'm quite worried about 2023 because the Federal Reserve is trying to engineer this soft landing and it may not get the job done. I mean, even if inflation has peaked at 9.1% a couple of months ago, that's a far cry from 2%. So the Federal Reserve still has lots of work to do to bring inflation down. Higher borrowing costs slows the economy. We've had, since the early 1980s, 8 previous rate tightening cycles, 6 have ended in recession. So they have a very poor record of engineering soft landings. I don't think they're going to engineer another one. And so CFOs have to be very much on guard.
So I love that advice. And I think you're right about focusing on cash flow. I mean, the reality is many CFOs for the last memorable years have been all focusing on growth and income statement. And so to your point, to get to the cash flow idea and focus on that balance sheet is a bit of a shift for many of them. And we have some people in our industry who have never been through a recession since they've started their careers of any significance.
Yeah, see, here's the experience, I think, of many firms, whether construction firms, manufacturers, others. Their costs have gone up, right? Their cost of goods sold has gone up. Their cost of providing services has gone up because compensation costs have risen so astronomically. But by and large, for much of this pandemic period, they've been able to pass along those cost increases to their customers. They've been able to preserve profit margin, in many cases actually grow profit margin. And I've had recently second quarter earnings announcements, and they were pretty good, right? Most companies surprised to the upside. But here's the thing. If the economy weakens further, in part because of these rising interest rates that the Federal Reserve controls, then all of a sudden, I think what many firms are going to find, and I think Walmart and Target have found this out in previous months, it becomes more difficult to pass along those cost increases. And all of a sudden, you're saddled with extra inventory. All of a sudden, you have to discount more merchandise. I understand that, Walmart during its earnings announcements, they're pretty good. But the point is, for a lot of firms, it's going to be difficult to push along those cost increases going forward. They'll still face supply issues, of course, but that's going to squeeze profit margins. And the CFO needs to be on top of that on a daily basis. What is happening with our margins? Are we starting to see diminished ability to exert pricing power? And if we are, to the extent that we are, we need to think about what that means for the cost side of the equation.
Got it. That's a really good point. And talk about the global situation, though, with like supply chains. Is the war in Ukraine, what any of those big impacts as you look at the world economy? What do you see as it comes over into the U.S. markets?
Well, huge impacts, of course, because the global economy is slipping into recession. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and others have been racing to downgrade their forecasts. The British have warned their citizens that we're about to head into a protracted recession. I think many of us know that because of Russia's assault on Ukrainian democracy, that because of the response to that from the West, that natural gas deliveries are threatened to Europe. That Europe is looking at a very cold winter. I'm not just talking about the temperature. I'm just talking about, obviously, their ability to access natural gas and therefore heat homes. Many manufacturers in Germany and elsewhere are concerned about a lack of sufficient electricity to operate at full capacity. And so you put all of that together, global economy slipping into recession, Chinese economy slowing pretty dramatically in recent years, the Latin American economy really struggling. And for U.S. exporters, that's not good news, is it? Right. On top of that, the U.S. dollar has been quite strong, which also further impacts negatively exports. So you put it all together, there's lots of risks out there. Risk of recession is quite elevated. And again, it's easy to get complacent because recent economic news has been better. Inflation has apparently peaked. The financial markets have been rallying, but don't get complacent. And one of the other things that CFOs have to do is push back against the CEO. Because from my experience, the CEO is always hey, let's do this. We can do this. Let's do this. We can do this. The CFO is the one that said, hold up. Let's look at the finances here. Does it make sense? Does it add to our profit margin? Can we actually get this done? Do we have enough workers? Can we find the materials? So on and so forth. What will the materials cost? What will the equipment cost? That kind of thing. And so this is a period fraught with risk for the CFO. And the CFO needs to be really very aggressive in monitoring on a daily basis. Now, of course, they always are, but particularly when risk of recession is high.
Yeah, I think in this case, it's like to your point, it's even more urgent, especially to get their handle on cash, and that means looking at the balance sheet, inventories, receivables, places where cash can get trapped and swell. I guess in addition, they have to really look at their suppliers' supply chain side, because this creditworthiness of them, which where a lot of that money could be locked up in inventory, et cetera, could get at risk, and their customers who owe them money. If those receivables drag out, that means that risk. And if those folks aren't strong or monitoring their cash flow, et cetera, it's a big kind of piggyback through all that stuff.
That's exactly right. We know that 30 days can become 60 days, can become 90 days pretty quickly, right? So again, cash management. And, even if a company's in pretty good financial shape, still busy, people are engaged, so on and so forth. If as you point out, if their customers can't pay them on time, right, because they haven't managed their cash flow. And again, there's going to be a lot of that going forward, I suspect, because the global economy is getting weaker and risk of recession in the United States is also elevated. Then, all of a sudden what appeared to be a really good cash flow situation turns out not to be a particularly good cash flow situation. We've seen that before. I mean, you pointed out that, there might be some CFOs that have really never been through an economic downturn as a CFO. They probably lived through 2008, 2009, 2010, but maybe in a different capacity. But we, many of us remember that 2008, 2009 episode and remember how challenging cash flow was, in part because people couldn't pay us. I'm an economist, but I'm also a small business owner, so I'm quite sensitive to that as well. I'm quite sensitive to accounts payable.
Yeah. And then that gets kind of cumulative add-on from the interest rate factors, right? So if the Fed's trying to control that soft landing, as you would say, and interest rates are rising, the cost of borrowing goes up, which adds a whole nother cost pressure on the businesses.
Well, that's exactly right. So borrowing costs are rising. So on the one hand, that slows economic growth, all things being equal, because consumers buy fewer durable goods. I mean, the home builders are saying already that we're in recession. The home building community is saying we're in recession right now. And that's a very interest rate sensitive sector. Obviously, it would impact auto sales and other interest rate sensitive goods. So that slows the economy, but it also drives up costs. I've noticed with my own business line of credit, the interest rates have gone up massively in recent months. The Federal Reserve began raising rates in March of this year, then did it again in May, then big, really hefty increases in June and July. That translates right into the line of credit, as it turns out. And so all of a sudden, borrowing costs are higher, overall costs are higher, right? So financing costs are higher. And so again, the CFO has to really think long and hard about cash flow. And again, for much of this period, it has not been as problematic because it was quite simple to, in hindsight at least, pass along those cost increases to customers.
Yeah.
But customers increasingly, I suspect, are going to become resistant to price increases. But the cost side of the economy will continue to be challenging, right? We still have these supply chain disruptions, not enough workers, so on and so forth. So costs keep rising. If your revenues don't keep up with that, obviously margins shrink, and ultimately you could have a bit of a cash crunch.
Yeah. Any perspective on the talent wars? I mean, we're seeing in accounting and finance significant shortage of people. That's a major focus we're doing. The Great Resignation continues to plague many of the finance and accounting departments we see. But what's that mean relative to the economy, Mike? Because you're going to see constant price competition, especially at the professional levels of this profession. Any insights into the cost of talent or how that's playing out as you see it?
And Tom, the situation is going to become more dire, as it turns out, because the Internal Revenue Service is about to hire more financial professionals, right?
Yes.
So, and by the way, I will say this as a small business owner, I would rather face the entire U.S. military, along with Homeland Security and the Baltimore City Police Department, than one IRS agent. But setting that aside, look, we in America are simply not growing our working age population enough. And I'll give you some statistics. From 1950 onwards, every 5 years or so, our working age population will grow by about 5 million people. Okay, and a lot of that was baby boomers, so on and so forth, but about 5 million people. But between 2016 and 2020, our working age population only grew by 2 million people, and the pace of growth has shrunk since that time, in part because immigration is not what it used to be, legal immigration. And so we're in this worker-constrained environment in every segment: hotels, restaurants, construction, manufacturing, financial services, healthcare, you name it. And that problem is not going to go away anytime soon. Yeah, unemployment might rise if we have a recession, but we'll still have a difficult time finding really talented folks because we just have not produced enough of them.
Yeah, that's a big one that continues to weigh on everyone. And you can't instantly make a a 25-year-old, right? That's part of the challenge.
You can actually. Tom, actually, you can create a 25-year-old, you can birth a 30-year-old, you can birth a 35-year-old with a software engineering degree. It's called legal immigration. I think one of the things that we have done in this country, over the course of 2 presidential administrations, by the way, there's been the last 2 presidents, neither one of them have favored really stepping up legal immigration, but we are preventing ourselves from becoming home to more human capital.
Yeah.
And so we don't have enough welders, machinists, mechanics, financial professionals, physicians, nurses, so on and so forth, teachers. You see school districts across the country screaming that we can't find enough teachers. Well, look, a lot of the teachers historically have come from other countries. They've been immigrants, right? And they've been excellent teachers. But if that flow has stopped and many teachers because of age are retiring now, guess what? You're not going to have enough teachers. Yeah. It's about demographic balance, and we don't have it.
Correct.
And that translates to the workforce and our productivity and our ability to find workers who can really do the job. And I have to tell you, one of the things that, and I don't know how much CFOs pay attention to this, but I suspect that one of the things that's happening in corporate America is that many workers who are not that productive, who are not that committed to the organizational mission, are being kept on because you still got to get the work done.
Yeah.
It's better to have somebody than nobody.
Yeah. And that's exactly what's playing out, right? They're afraid to let anyone go, so they change those standards, if you will. You add in the whole remote work situation, hybrid work. It's a big issue that we're seeing finance officers dealing with. And to your point, there is no easy answer to that. Now, we do believe you can upskill and try to get some more talent inside your current team, but overall, you can't fill that. And that, the demographics. We work with a futurist named Daniel Burris, and he calls that a hard trend. What the population looks like. That's where we got the baby bust that created that little dip in employment back in the Gen X days. So we're now experiencing that college age student and into employment is at, like you said, 3 million people behind. That's a lot of people that aren't in the workforce, and and machines aren't going to make that all up. Obviously, in finance, there is a degree of automation, but not enough to fill that gap.
Yes, and I'm one of those precious and rare Gen Xers. So, but here's the thing: you can train all day, right? You take your current team, you train them up, you make them more productive, you advance them professionally, and then guess what happens? They leave for your competitor. Yeah. This is the period of the Great Resignation, right? At least through the first 6 months of the year, every month was associated with more than 4 million people resigning from their jobs, right? And that's the fastest way to a pay increase. And the labor market knows it, by the way. The labor force knows it. The fastest way to a pay increase is to switch employers.
Yeah.
Right. And so that we see a lot of that. So that actually is economically a disincentive to provide training, right? Because the more skills I invest in someone, the more attractive they are to other employers.
Yeah.
And the more likely they are to leave in some sense. So, it's a real problem for America.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And we hope there's some creative ways. Actually, one thing to let you know about is we have now formed a official registered apprenticeship with the Department of Labor that creates a pathway for even community college as well as 4 years to get them into what we call finance business partner role and give them kind of learn while they earn. And that's opening up at least some channels of employment that it won't fix our deficit of finance professionals, but it will give us an extra chunk coming into the market. And we're just now launching that this fall. So that's one exciting part.
That's very good. Now, as you know, over the last decade or so, maybe a bit longer than that, 2 decades, there's been a lot of focus on the financial literacy of young people.
Yeah.
Right. And so maybe that might have also sown some seeds there as these young people have been exposed to finance and these issues earlier on in life, and therefore may have cultivated a desire to enter the financial services. One can only hope.
Yeah.
But I hope that is the case.
Yep. And that is something that we've always done as a profession to try to keep that thing moving. But all right, this is awesome. I think you've really covered all the pieces we wanted to cover. Any final advice for our CFOs out there from your perch as a brilliant economist?
Oh, I would just say wait for it. The economy is going to change and then change again. There's going to be lots of volatility. There's going to be lots of false starts. The economy is going to look good for a while, and then it's going to look terrible again. That's going to look good again, and that's the way it's going to go. And that's because so many things are changing out there, right? So the era of large scale, and this is going to sound strange, stimulus packages from the federal government is over. I know that Congress has been working on new legislation, but in terms of size, in terms of magnitude, these pale in comparison to the packages that came out of 2020 or 2021. And so that's happening. The Federal Reserve is raising interest rates. The world is changing economically. Supply chains being restored to America. Everything is in flux, right? The things we came to take for granted, like just-in-time inventory pre-pandemic, that seems to be over. And so CFOs and other C-level professionals are going to have to really think about what this means for their enterprise. They're going to have to roll with the punches. There's going to be a lot of rolling to do.
I hear you. I love your, for me, the takeaways are don't get complacent. Whatever you do, you've got to be extremely vigilant and look past the current news of the day, right? The market's up, that kind of thing, and be preparing for that recession. If it doesn't happen, you'll be in much better shape. Focus on cash flow was another big piece of your advice. Clearly, that's a huge one. It's not all about revenue growth now. It's about cash flow and understanding both your suppliers and your customers' creditworthiness as you look at where your money's tied up. I think those are some really good points. So with that, it's been awesome spending a little bit of time with you. You can follow Anirban on Twitter. It's at Sage, SAGEANIRBAN, or on the web at sagepolicy.com. Thank you for joining me, and don't miss our other Future Ready live sessions. We'll be back here on LinkedIn the first and third Tuesday of every month at noon Eastern. Anirban, great seeing you, and thank you again for today's conversation.
Righto.